Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Janine McCulloch, and I am a Senior Education Officer in Education Scotland. I actually work in the Inclusion, Wellbeing and Equality team, and I'm really delighted to have you all here today. And thank you for giving up your time this afternoon, because I know everybody's been busy with youngsters today. So this is the third of our 6 webinars, and it's based on the professional learning paper, What Scotland Learns, Building Back Better. We've put a link in the chat for you, so if you haven't already had a chance to have a look at that, it's really heartwarming, and it's really worth a look. So the professional learning paper is the of a synthesis of the publication of What Scotland Learns, the 100 Stories of Lockdown, with relevant research literature. We structured the professional learning paper into 6 themes, loosely based around we higeus, so it's based on relationships, leadership, health and wellbeing, learning and teaching, communities, and finally achievements. So subsequently, we've created a series of webinars that follow these themes, and they have been running since January and will continue all the way through to June. So the format of the seminar is a presentation, followed by just a couple of questions sent in by yourselves in advance. However, we will be monitoring the chat throughout the session, and if we have time at the end, we'll try to address a few more questions. So today's webinar, the focus is on the theme of health and wellbeing. We always intrinsically knew how the connection to school affected children's well-being. This last year, since the pandemic began, this has really been brought home to us in much connection with school, connection with their friends through school, and the support that youngsters get just being at school has on our young people. So today our speaker will explore the interconnectedness between learning and well-being by providing practical examples of the innovative ways of working and decision-making that he has used to increase learner engagement in his own school. He will illustrate how he and his staff team have proactively gone about improving well-being through examples, everyday examples, and practical ideas which are research-informed and driven by learner voice. So our speaker today, Nicky Murray, he's a head teacher, an author and a dad. He's recently published The Little Iceberg, which he wrote to support children's mental health by helping them to explore feelings that may overwhelm them or be hard to talk about. The book sold 1,000 copies in the first 6 weeks of publication, and it has been added to the curriculum of some schools as part of an increased focus on wellbeing, obviously since the pandemic. So notably, Nick has also presented, so you may have heard of him before, at the ASOAR Nations Conference in 2018, where he was described as a creative and a cutting-edge thinker. He also lends a hand as being a teaching fellow and a lecturer to new teachers coming into the profession, and this is not his first headship. So Nicky's journey as a head teacher started in St Ninian's Episcopal Primary School in Perth, followed by Burnside Primary School in Angus, and now he continues his own learning journey as a head teacher at Claypots Castle Primary School in Dundee. So he's managed to work his way around Tayside. So when he was at Burnside, the school was inspected, and they received 2 excellents and 2 very goods. And the inspectors actually reported that, and I'm going to quote this, significant impact of the school's approaches to improving children's wellbeing in the school result in a culture of mutual respect, fairness, equity and inclusion. Children's wellbeing is central to the work of the school. A lovely quote to have said about the school. So like many of you, Nick has lived through these difficult times and the tasks that have led to daily challenges coping with the pandemic, running a primary school, and always keeping in mind how he has to support and how he can best support the children, their parents and the staff in the school. So I'm delighted to welcome Nikki Murray to speak to you today. Now, I will just change presentations.
Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar. Hopefully you can hear me okay. If you're anything like me, it's a tall order, just trying to keep focused at this time of day based on the fact we've just returned. This is our second day back, so it's been pretty manic. Over the next hour, I'm going to try and frame the presentation in a way that addresses how we went about looking at wellbeing in the first instance, trying to do a bit of praxis about turning that thinking into action, and how we developed some inclusive pedagogies and decision-making frameworks. And hopefully that'll be useful for everyone. I think one of the challenges that Janine expressed was moving to a new authority. Today is the year anniversary that I moved into Dundee, which was right smack dab at the start of lockdown, and I couldn't even meet my staff face to face. So that was challenging, and this year has been, as it has been for everybody on this call, really challenging. One of the benefits of having been a teacher or a head teacher previously was that I had developed ways of working and ideas that I took with me. So I wasn't really starting from scratch. So this presentation kind of spans two contexts, Burnside and also Claypots Castle in Dundee. So Claypots Castle was near a deprivation. In terms of Tayside, my school has the most amount of SIMD 1, 2 and 3 households in the whole of Tayside, and there's over 400 children attending the school. One of the things that made me do was really have a particular focus on equity. And if you look at the discourses that are around at the moment in the equity, many are located within health inequality. And so that's something that I began to really try and determine exactly what our approaches were. And one of the first things that we did was try and conceptualize well-being. There's a wee story about two fish. The first fish says to the other fish, "How's the water?" And the other fish says, "What the hell is water?" And I think a lot of schools can find themselves in that predicament when we're so busy swimming around that we don't actually have the time or energy or effort or enthusiasm to stop and actually think critically and examine concepts like well-being. And hopefully I'll be able to give you a wee bit of space to think about that tonight and share our journey around that, which is what we did. If I was to ask everybody on this call, for example, to define play, every single person on this call would have a different definition of what play meant to them, and rightly so. But what we tried to develop was a simple definition of well-being that was good enough. And the definition of simplicity is that it's accessible, you can build on it, and it's functional. So that was our kind of approach to it. We wanted something that was simple, a definition that everybody could access, everybody that could build upon it, and it was functional. It served the purpose. And that's important because we moved from a complicated landscape to a complex. When I got HMI'd and an inspector was speaking to me, he said, "I've never seen a school with as much complexity as you've got." And I went, "Oh." And he said, "No, that's a really good thing because you have to move from complicated to complex. And the only way to simplicity is through complexity. So you're trying to move from everybody doing different things to everybody doing the same thing, to everybody understanding why they're doing it." And that's why it's really important that we spend a bit of time conceptualizing what is well-being, what is it? So this is what I'm going to try and focus on in terms of how we develop this across the two concepts, or contexts rather. The first foray into well-being was looking at research, and we looked at the World International Summit of Education report, which was commissioned. It was called An Agenda for Change, Health Matters. It was by Professor Artwani, and I think it was about 2015-16. It's a really good report. But basically it defined the true purpose of education is about learning and well-being, and children generating well-being for themselves, for others, and for the environment. And I thought, wow, learning and well-being, that's something that we could potentially use as a driver in terms of the school and how we organise our engagement, how we organise the learning. It was really important that, for me, I was trying to build something that people could hold on to. Because, as you know, there's so many forces and pushes and pulls. Attainment, you've got parental engagement, you've got assessment of children's progress, all the things in the national framework called drivers, they're forces. And they can be either a force for good, or they can actually really pull you apart at times. And so it's really important that we try and navigate our way by adopting these kind of ways of working. I aligned that idea about learning and well-being to the idea of what's called a living bridge. And a living bridge is something that's created in certain villages around the world, where they excavate the root system of a tree and just point it in the right direction. And these bridges actually stand the test of time. They last hundreds and hundreds of years just by getting the root system, the guidance system going, and then pointing them in the right direction. So for us, in terms of the Burnside journey, it was learning and well-being. Is it going to enhance the quality of well-being? Is it going to enhance the quality of learning? And we started to develop that idea to make sure that we were able to hold that tension and deal with the competing forces. So more recently, Michael Fullan and his Drivers for Whole System Success, which is a really brilliant document, and I'll probably talk a wee bit about that. He basically talked about learning is well-being. Learning is well-being. And they don't do very well when they're separated. He also talked about the fact that learning and well-being are really is a unified learning proposition that can actually transcend the current circumstance of the pandemic. If you focus on learning and well-being, then you're able to actually create momentum and create energy, which will allow you to actually build something that's going to last and transcend the circumstance. So we started to think about that, about how we could actually get that journey underway about what well-being is. So the first thing I did when I arrived at Claypots remotely was to buy the Charlie Mackesy book, which is, I'll never get it right, The Boy, the Fox, the Owl and the Horse. It's probably in the wrong order. But basically I bought that book and I started to talk to the staff about, this is what I want you to do. I just want you to read the book. It's full of meditations, brilliant artwork, and just hopefully you'll find it of value, you'll find it quite inspiring. And all the staff did. They really liked the book. So we made that our first kind of topic. We asked all the classes just to try and engage with it in whatever way they wanted. And from that, the primary 6 teacher came to me and said, our children are really hooked on this. And we'd like to actually do a wee digital project where we try and run with this to make sure that we're looking at the ideas within the book, but maybe mapping them onto the school values. So if I can ask you to click on again, if you can. The next slide, Janine. She's maybe not. Oh, there you are. Okay, so we created, this is what the P6 has created, a sketch note, and it went to a professional sketch note artist, illustrator, but basically it was around our values, which are in the top corner: trust, respect, responsibility, fair, improving and caring. And what they did was they decided that they would create these up the right-hand side. You might not see them so well, but basically these were our kind of propositions or our axioms about how we wanted to map on trust, for example. And one of the examples of trust is a very simple expression from Charlie Mackesy is, what's the bravest thing that you've ever said? Help. Improving is, I am so small. Yes, but you make a huge difference. So the primary 6s chose the axioms, the wee expressions, to map onto the school values, so that we could use them for levers, so that we could actually start to have conversations around what does that actually mean to you, try and conceptualise what these values meant in all different circumstances in and out of school. And that worked really, really well. It was very purposeful. And so what we decided to do was think about, well, how can we actually use this? It's all very well that they're creating these digital images and they're doing all the artwork on iPads and they've created the rebranding, if you like, of the values, but what good is it? It can help reframe conversations, yes, but what we decided to do was try and think of something that was slightly more, I suppose, meaningful in terms of the currency that would give us to run the school. So we looked to the Glasgow School of Art, and they had this principled way of running their design, which was ambiguity, space, and someone else. So I can't remember what it was, but what we did was we actually took that idea and said, right, let's develop core principles across the school. And one of them was from the core driver, and you can see that on the sketch note. I am enough as I am. So Charlie Mackesy book, the one that the children liked best was, what is your biggest discovery? I am enough as I am. Now that was, for me, transformational, because I was thinking, wow, the children already get it. It's about a sense of agency and an internal locus of control over things. So that's why that's on the sketch note. That's our core driver. I am enough as I am. So what we did was we looked back at Fullan, and Fullan was talking about the fact that academic motivation or obsession can actually be quite destructive. And if you focus too much on the academic side of things, then actually it's going to lead to really unhealthy outcomes for you. What you've got to be focused on, according to Fullan's research, is purpose, meaning, contribution and control. Purpose, meaning, contribution and control. So by looking at these ways of engaging around and organising ourselves around the values, we started to think about purpose and meaning. And then it was about how children could actively contribute, and also about the level of control that they had over things. One of the ideas that we had about control was very simple, and it's on there about the internal locus of control. There was a guy called Germetsi who was a Swiss psychologist, and he was working out in New York, and at the time he was following a kind of study into what is resilience, and he was one of the first people to actually coin the definition of resilience. And what he did was his team of researchers followed this wee boy around who was 9 years old, and the wee boy had a lot of bounce back ability, if you like. He was really tough. He had an absent father and an alcoholic mother, very poor area in New York, and the team of researchers decided to follow him around and find out what made him tick. And they discovered that at every particular lunchtime, this wee boy would do something that was really peculiar. All his more affluent peers would sit and take out their packed lunches, and they would eat their prawn sandwiches or whatever they were eating, bagels and that. And he would go into his pocket and he would take 2 pieces of bread, nothing else, just 2 pieces of stale bread. It was the only food that he could find in the house. And they called it, Germetsi called it the no-filling sandwich, which basically meant that in terms of resilience, we are more resilient to the extent that we feel we've got control over things. So that wee boy, that wee 9-year-old in New York, the only thing he could control was getting 2 pieces of bread. But that was enough. That was enough for him to feel like he was like everybody else, that he had a measure of control over his circumstance by putting those 2 pieces of bread together. And so that's where his idea came from. The resilience is about that sense of control, an internal locus of control. So we developed that in terms of well-being in 2 ways. We looked at learning, first of all, and we did it through stuck strategies, which we'll talk about later on, but also about the 5-point scale. Now, many people have probably heard about this in terms of work, in terms of well-being. The incredible 5-point scale is about recognising different emotions and how you feel at different peaks of that 1 to 5. 1 being, I'm really calm, I'm really happy. 5 means I'm going to blow. And what we did, and have done successfully, is give that sense of agency to the children. So all the children, every single child, created a 1 to 5 scale where they understood at a 1 they feel a certain way, they think a certain way. And then therefore, the strategies to keep them at 1 are, take a drink, go for a walk, talk to a partner, all of those things. But when they got to a 5, we would actually talk to them about, we think you're at a 5. And it could be non-verbal in terms of just giving that kind of signal on 5 or a 3 or a 2, some rude signals as well you might get back. But the reality of that was it was giving children a sense of, this is what I need to do if I feel like I'm at a 4 or a 3, and here's what I need to do to get down the kind of emotional kind of scale. And it's really been really prolific in terms of making sure that children have a sense of, okay, that's not working for me on this occasion. So you can have a wee chat about it and say, all right, well, that doesn't work, but we've got loads of other strategies we can use as well. So giving children that sense of control over emotions and regulation was really, really important. So having developed that idea at Burnside, when I came in, as I said, there was very little in the way of me actually getting in contact with parents, and even standing at the gate was a no-no because nobody was coming in. So what we decided to do was look at the curriculum and think about one particular area, which was regulation. And from a questionnaire, none of the parents had a clue what regulation was. So rather than, go into a big drill about it, we sent out a CAM box to every home in the community, which is over 300 odd CAM boxes. And in the CAM box, there was things like Play-Doh, bubbles, worry dolls, wee scripts, lots of different aspects of what we would probably use in terms of getting a child to regulate and be grounded and stay in the present and manage those feelings, those overwhelming feelings. And what we encouraged the parents to do alongside that was to try them out, the parents and the children. And then a wee script that went alongside it about how they could use the different parts of the CAM box. And the feedback from the parents was brilliant, with parents in tears, really overwhelmed about how kind we were being, but also how attuned we were to the fact that it was really, really difficult for people not being able to leave their homes and stuff. And in those boxes, we provided a teddy for every single home. And what we asked them to do was put the teddy in the top stair window so that when all the children were allowed, the 1 hour of exercise where they walked around the scheme, then they would be able to see all these different teddies in the windows. And that created that sense of Maslow and that sense of belonging. And so you could drive around our area, and even before I'd met half the children, I was able to see hundreds of these wee bears in the top floor of the building. So it was amazing. It was really overwhelming. But that's because people really genuinely started to get to grips with what we were trying to do in terms of that aspect of our curriculum. And one of the important things is that the community understands what the key features of your curriculum are. So by giving it and saying, parents, you have a go, not just the kids, parents, you have a go at it as well. That worked really, really well. And part of our commitment to that, so it's sustainable, is that every single day we have time to regulate, which means there's protected time every single day where the children undertake regulation activity. And that was obviously on the back of the fact that the parents had experience of that through lockdown. Okay, can you click on again, please, Janine? And again, great, thanks. So these are some of the kind of visuals that you'll see that we did, to do with the Charlie Mackesy work. And these are the children's designs, which we then mapped on a backdrop of the school building. So we took photographs from around the school so they could contextualise it. So these images are actually mapped on to areas of the school, and underneath it is the expressions about, what's the bravest thing that I've ever said, help, and so on. The agency, sense making and dialogue, as I said, is our core learning design principles. We always think about how much agency does a child have over this experience, over this environment. Have they got opportunities to make sense of things? And also, is there opportunities for dialogue? But that just doesn't apply just to the children, it applies to the staff as well. Agency, sense making and dialogue are our core principles about how we organise our engagement. Okay, can you click on again? Thanks. Okay, so relationships. Now, relationships was obviously a really important part of it, but before I go into that, I think there's a bit about the work from Fulham, which was really important, and about how we organised our school day. I talked a wee bit about that there's a yawning gap between how schools are organised and how children learn. Now, that was really kind of poignant for me, that actually my traditional experience of school wasn't really very different. I mean, I didn't enjoy school very much when I was wee. I was always in trouble and stuff, but the reality of that was that the current experience wasn't so vastly different. And so what I was trying to think about was giving people permission to try and organise the school day around how children learn. And I think we managed to do that with an idea called think boards, which comes up later in the presentation. So the idea about well-being, we got to the simple definition of well-being. And the simplest possible definition for us was that it's about leading a life that you value. So that's it. That's our definition of well-being, leading a life that you value. Now, that's incumbent upon the fact that it's not about what I value or what your parent values. It's about you as a person. What do you value for the child? And that means that you need to focus on reflection. So throughout the course of the first couple of months when I was in school, we had every single piece of learning linked to the values, opportunities to reflect on trust, respect, responsibility, fairness, every single bit of learning, even if it was contrived. And it was to get them into the habit of reflection, constant reflection. And the reason we did that was because John Dewey had said, who's an American psychologist, he said, there's no learning without reflection upon experience. None. No learning without reflection upon experience. So one of the core processes that we focused on right from the very beginning was reflection. Children have to have opportunities to try and make sense of things. which is why obviously one of our principles is sense making. So the other aspect of it is aligned with the idea of Martin Luther King, and Martin Luther King talked about intelligence, and intelligence and character is not enough. It's basically, intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character is what true education is about. But there's a wee bit at the end of the quote that talks about the fact that actually intelligence and character is great, but actually you need worthy objectives to focus that intelligence and character upon. The power of concentration. So from that aspect of it, it was really important that we linked all our learning to values, values-based learning. And it's as simple as every single lesson must be connected in some way to reflecting upon our school values. Okay, the strong shared narrative was really important, and that came through the agency, sense making and dialogue. But when we went to remote learning, we actually focused on, I think it was presence, instruction and feedback. Those were the core principles of our design when we were in remote learning. So we shifted slightly from agency, sense making and dialogue, presence and instruction and feedback. And that got us through. That got us through the remote learning phase of it, because all the teachers knew that if they were designing anything, it had to have a teacher presence, it had to have a focus on instruction, and it had to have a focus on feedback. So these strong shared narratives about where am I now, where am I going, are really, really important to make sure that everybody can access it. And that was important for us in terms of that relationship that was inclusive. We wanted to create these wee agents of change, if you like. So the focus then became about the children are the report. So you know how you're trying to create, or we hope we're trying to create a learner-led system where actually children then become capable of writing their own reports. But that starts on a daily basis where a parent can ask a child, what you do in the day or what were you learning? And the child can actually talk about something. If I ask my girls about that, they'll probably say nothing, or I can't remember. Now, that's fine because they're tired. But the bottom line is we want to try and develop the child's ability to really talk about their learning. And the only way to do that is to teach it, to build time into the day where you're actually focused on mistakes. What were the mistake you made today and how did you learn from it? What did you get right? What strategy did you use today? How did you celebrate somebody's success at your table today? All these different ways of framing their experience, hopefully, will create that kind of internal thought process where they say, you know what, I can actually report really, really well. And that will enhance the quality of their ability to talk to their parents about their learning. But not only that, it will totally uplift the community. If you've got hundreds of wee children going home every night talking about how well they're doing at school or what they're learning, it totally reframes the negative component, which you usually get at schools where they go back and they'll push me over and this, that and everything. That's a focus, and I agree. But unless you give them an alternative focus in terms of reframing it in terms of learning and how well they're doing and the value they're placing on it, it's really important we did that. So we called it the story of the day, and that happens across every class where they spend time just going through it, not at the end of the day, throughout the course of the day. So decision-making frameworks are really important, and I talked about the fact that once you've conceptualized well-being, which we did, about leading a life that you value, we then had to think about, okay, you can go to inclusive pedagogies, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but the safety aspect in terms of decision-making framework was really important to us. So what we were thinking along those lines was, if you've got a situation, there was a really great analogy about the tower in the field, and it's by Lipling, which is criminology. And he said, you probably heard this expression about ivory towers. Those in their ivory towers didn't know what they're talking about. You know, they don't know how hard it is in the field. They've not got to deal with the parents, and they've not got to deal with the children, and they've not got to deal with the different demands on the curriculum and all sorts. And what they basically developed, the idea in terms of that criminology handbook was, yeah, people in the towers are actually academics. They're academics telling you, you should do this, you should do that. And there's a real tension between these academics and what you're doing on the ground. And so what you've got to try and do is, the analogy is the tower in the field, where people in the tower know, they have a sense of perspective, where people in the field don't, because it's messy and it's, you know, you kind of see the wood for the trees. So the important thing about that is, you as a leader or you as a teacher in the class or a support staff member have to create elevations. You have to create elevations where people can actually have a sense of perspective when they're in the field. And so one of those was around safety, choice and trust. The example that led us to this way of thinking was Napoleon. Napoleon was obviously a pretty good warmonger, But basically they said, oh, he's a brilliant strategist, but he wasn't that good. What he did was he would create a plan, and then he would say to his lieutenants, see when this goes west, and it will. This plan will fail. Make sure you make decisions on the field, but you think about X, Y, and Z. And that's what he was brilliant at, entrusting and empowering his lieutenants to make decisions based on criteria, X, Y, Z. So the example I'm looking at, first of all, and this is safety, choice, and trust. We had a really tragic incident where there was a bit of bereavement of a parent, very tragic. And I got a phone call at home, and it was the wife of the person that had passed away. And I answered the phone, and my wife obviously handed me the phone, and she said, my husband's passed away. I'd like you to come to my home tomorrow and talk to my son. And I said, okay, I'll be there. And I came off the phone and my wife said, who's that? And I said, it was a parent, and she's just lost her husband. And she said, how did she get her number? And I said, oh, she must have known a teacher and da, da, da. She got the number anyway. And she says, what are you doing? I says, I'm going to the house. She says, you don't know what you're doing. You can't get involved in that. You don't know what. I says, I'm going. I says, I don't know what I'm going to say, but I'm going. So I drove there the next morning, and to be fair, I was scared, because I thought, I don't know what I'm going to say. And I got there, and there was police everywhere and whatnot, and I got invited through the living room, and I hugged the boy and had a wee chat with him, and he went upstairs, and the mum sat down, and we talked for 2 hours, just me and her in the room. And she told me all about her husband, and he was an amazing guy. It was really tragic death. And she then turned around to me and says, and what are you going to do for my son? And I said, without even really any pause, I says, well, all we can offer your son is safety, choice, and trust. And she said, those are just words. And I says, aye, they are. But let me explain. I says, when your boy comes to school today, I'm going to ask, what do you want your day to look like? And you can then say, well, I want this and I want that. Well, you can have this, but you can't have that. And so you give a sense of choice. The other aspect is, if you're not feeling so good, you go and sit on that chair and you read your book, and I'll know that you need a wee bit of space. That's the space that you go to, and you take a wee bit of time for yourself. So that's safety. And the other thing was about trust, and I explained it, just saying, if you need to speak to me, I will drop everything and I will be there for you. No matter what I'm doing, I will drop it and I'll be there for you. And she said, that's good enough for me. And that was, for me, one of the most transformational points in my career, where I thought to myself, do you know what? If you can actually think along those lines about a decision-making framework that empowers people to make really good decisions, and this was about trauma, about safety, choice, and trust. Think about that lens of safety, about choice, about trust, then you will be able to provide a certain level of experience and an outcome that you know you feel good about yourself. So the agency, sense-making, and dialogue, again, aligns with that idea of collective autonomy. It means that you're giving people permission when you're not there, a decision-making framework. So that I'm maybe lightening the mood a wee bit, there's another one where I go for runs a lot with my golden retriever. So I'm out in the village, I'm out running with my golden retriever, and we always go past sheep, and the sheep are absolutely nuts. Like, they'll go for the dog will go for the sheep, and you know, so it's a real tension on me when I'm running. And I was thinking about it, and these sheep have the same idea. They have 3 things to think about. They basically, when they see my dog, Ellie, they basically go, right, the first thing they need to do is run at the same speed, avoid collision, and head for the centre of the flock. That's the 3 things. Avoid collision, run at the same speed, and head for the centre of the flock. And they are operating their way in terms of, you know, making decision-making an art form. And I see it myself, and now I'm actually looking around at all the different examples of that, where you can actually think about, how do I actually navigate my way through the world of work and my own personal life? Decision-making frameworks are really powerful and transformational. So along those lines, we start to think about the idea of a think board. Now, a think board, as I said, it was a way that we organise our day. And so the think board came from the idea about, when we first started in terms of the lockdown, it was about trust in me learning, about relationships, about agency. So it was trust in me. Now, if you take trust in me, it actually spells out, if you think it would be a bit creative, time, T-I-M-E, trust in T-I, me. So we start to think about, right, how can we use that in terms of organising our day? So we came up with the idea of every single day would be protective time, time to talk, time to play, time to regulate, time to learn, time to think. And underpinning each of those was different aspects. So play was obviously about, exploring play-based pedagogy. Time to learn was about using strategies and learn how to learn. Time to think was about recognition. Time to talk was about check-ins and regulation. And regulation was obviously really purely about regulation and mindfulness and meditation and breathing and all that. And what we actually did was, as a process, we actually then started to communicate that through the remote phase as well. So the parents started to get a good understanding of that. And we went from participation in terms of engagement, where we went from 26% in the first lockdown engaged in terms of the work online. It went to 91% for close to 400 children. And that's exceptional, based on the fact that the community was buying in and understanding what we were trying to actually achieve and how we were organising the learning. Because the learning was exactly the same. The think board for the remote and whether they're in school was exactly the same. There was still activities around talk. There was still activities around play, about regulation, about learning, and about thinking. So next slide, please. So here's an example. You probably kind of read that, but that's basically it. So this is our planning. Time to think, time to learn, time to play, time to grow, time to talk. And under each of those, the staff just enter, they just describe what it is in terms of the learning that they hope is achieved across that term. And that's the think board. It keeps everybody right. And it's a real focus in terms of organising their engagement, organising their learning around what matters to us. And that goes back to the yawning gap that Frulan talked about how schools are organised and how children learn. Well, we think children learn by talking, by thinking, by playing, by regulation, and by learning about learning. So that was our focus in terms of how we organise our learning. Okay, can you click on again, please? Okay, so obviously I've talked a wee bit about groundwork and Maslow and about making sure that you're sharing what you're developing with the community. And one of the first things that we did here was, because I wasn't able to communicate, I sent a wee kind of introduction out, a wee video, and then we whipped up enough money to make sure that every single home got a wee bag of tea bags and about 4 or 5 chocolate biscuits each. And I sent that out to every home in the community. Now that's previously at Burnside, I'd done it with a fridge magnet. I put the school aims on a fridge magnet and sent a script out to every home in the community. And I thought that worked really well. So I took that learning, and this time I put tea bags and chocolate biscuits and a wee script about what I was trying to do and introducing myself, just saying, look, take a wee bit of time, have a wee chocolate biscuit, thanks for all your hard work and your support, and let me just, introduce myself kind of thing. And that worked really, really well. And the feedback was a wee bit quirky, obviously, because it's not really a thing that people do. But I thought, yeah, this is something that I think the community certainly did appreciate that. The other aspect of it was drawing attention to the community. And we had a system in terms of folding the edges inward. And what that means is you take people on the periphery and you put them right at the very heart of what you do. So one of the things that we tried to do successfully was to try and engineer what was out there in terms of community assets, about particularly in terms of the deprivation and poverty. It was coordinating across all the different charities and local restaurants to make sure that there was a food offer of free food at lunchtimes and dinner times. And that was really important because some of the charities were doing the same service on the same day, leaving days unattended or lunches and dinners that weren't actually, serviced. So what we did was we made every effort to make sure that we were kind of coordinating, if you like, so every single available opportunity to have access to food and, a warm meal was basically catered for. And that was, I know it sounds trite, but it was actually really powerful because it made sure that obviously there was every possible opportunity was taken to make sure that the children and the families were being fed. And that then builds into the idea about toast bars, where you make sure every day we have toast bars where all 300 odd children get the opportunity to have toast throughout the day. And while some schools might say, but that's an inconvenience because it's a bit fiddly, it's important. Because sometimes you don't know if those children have actually had their tea. So it's important that you actually give them a bit of toast before they get their school dinner. And again, the idea about the aspect of Maslow and belonging, because of the ventilation and COVID, what we decided to do was buy every single child in the school one of those oversized hoodies. Same colour, same fleece lined, just to make sure that every single child was able to put that over the top of whatever they wanted to wear, but it made sure that they felt a sense of belonging. And the feedback from parents was it was really very, very much appreciated, but also it made the children feel good as well because they all felt the same. You know, they were all part of something, and also it helped because the ventilation with the windows, as everybody knows with COVID, is absolutely freezing. So having a hoodie, although it's a small thing, it did create that sense of belonging and build on, you know, the kind of work we were trying to do with the can boxes and then the tea bags and the chocolate bits. Okay, next slide, please. So we talked a wee bit about, we're talking a bit about decision-making frameworks, about safety, choice and trust, and agency, sense-making and dialogue for learning and design. Learner voice is really important, and I've always successfully built strategy around this. One of the first things I did in both schools was to ask 4 questions, which is through learner conferencing. First question I asked was, what does your teacher do to help you learn? That was the first question to every single child. What does your teacher do to help you learn? And the responses were, you know, make a lesson, tell me what to do, write things on the board, give me a jotter. Very, very much in terms of the power being with the teacher. The second question was around, what do you do when you get stuck? And then we got loads of responses about never give up, always keep trying, very little in the way of strategies as a baseline. The third question was, what progress have you made and how do you know? And they were all saying, my teacher tells me I've done well, or my teacher marked my work. And the last one was about how do you set next steps for yourself. My teacher sets next steps for myself. So it was very clear that from that ideal about a learner-led system, we couldn't be further away from it. So we took the first one, which was about what does your teacher do to help you learn, and we flipped it. So the staff were starting to think about, okay, what can we do to help the children learn? So that went down the lines of a biology of behaviour, understanding the biological basis of behaviour, about regulation, about children in terms of their needs, their social-emotional needs. And that has been pretty transformational in terms of children thinking that they are actually listened to. There's a level of attunement between the adult and the child. So that was the first thing. The second thing was about stuck strategies. So we took all the responses and we took self-talk, you know, I the tiger, Rocky, never give up, put that to one side, and then we focused explicitly about stuck strategies. And if you click on, can you click on? Because I think there's a visual there. So we came up with our own stuck strategies, and these stuck strategies were organised around take, try, and talk. Try looking back, try a different way, take a break, talk to your buddy, talk to your partner. And that was the strategies that came from Learner's Voice, where we then started to think from P1 to P7, every child knew what to do when they didn't know what to do. They would use these strategies to find a way to keep learning, to regulate themselves, because obviously learning is really stressful. Can you click back to the first slide? So that aspect of the number 2 question about what do you do when you get stuck allowed us to create these stuck strategies that are used from P1 to P7 from Learner Voice. Number 3 was about progress, and I'll maybe talk about that later. But that was really important about creating a cold and a hot task approach, where, for example, if I'm talking about doing a newspaper report, I will just teach that. I will no teach it. I'll just assess it. I'll just say, go and write me a newspaper report. The children aren't able to do it, or some of them might. Some of them know about paragraphs and headings and whatnot. But you then teach what you need to teach. You then do a hot task, which is exactly the same as the cold task, and you have a measure of progress. You have the starting point and you have the end point. And then what you do is you share it with the child, and then you share it with the parent as well. So the parent can see the progression that's happening. Not only that, the child's totally motivated. I know that if I put a wee bit of effort in, this is what happens. I know if I use this strategy, I know that this will be the end result. So cold and hot tasking was our way of looking at trying to develop a progression narrative for every single child, which is really important. Then from the perspective of visualising play, we've got some really fascinating work that's going on in terms of test to play, where the children are actually playing, and what we are using is a visualiser like this one, which basically goes onto a laptop and it's live streamed into the classroom, And the classroom, all the children are looking at a particular group who are playing, and they're doing a bit of conferencing. They're examining the interactions and the social intelligence of it, and making sure that all of these behaviours that are happening and all of the conceptual improvements that children are making through play and whatnot are actually captured. And not only that, they're actually conferenced. So the children are actually getting to see, and that's why we're calling it visualising play. It's really, it's an exciting test that we're actually doing. So the stuck strategies I've talked about, and then we developed what's called the LALA map. The LALA map is absolutely transformational in terms of, it's just a piece of paper with a couple of boxes on it, and you ask the children, where do you like spending time? Now, they might say at my granny's, in the playground, my bedroom, and then you say, right, what you're learning in each of these places. And so they write around the box. At granny's, I'm learning things like I'm learning to read. Learning to read at my granny's. Oh, you're learning to read at your granny's, but you're not learning to read in the classroom. That's interesting. Or what you're learning in the playground, to stand up for myself. All right, how are you doing that? And so these, from the child in terms of learning voice, simple, couple of boxes. Where are you learning? And where do you like spending time? And what are you learning? And then that creates a real opportunity to think about achievement as well. You can see children who are not doing very, very much. And so then you can put things in place to make sure that they've got opportunities, which is really important. And the life and ethos is obviously what we're talking about the think board, where it's about time to play, time to regulate, time to talk, and so on. Okay, can you click on again, please? And again, yeah. So we're a very lucky school because we're obviously working in partnership with Systema, which is about creating across 4 sites in Scotland orchestra, where every single child in our school is part of the Systema orchestra, where we all learn string instruments. And that, whilst you would have thought that that's taken a bit of a hit because of the lockdown, the musical instructors have been absolutely amazing. So every single child in our school has experience of learning to play an instrument. And that is obviously through the work of the charity. And so during lockdown, they were going out, they were playing in children's gardens, they were running activity clubs, they were coming in during lockdown and putting on, remote activities. They have been absolutely brilliant in terms of one of the most exciting kind of partnerships we've got going on at the moment. And again, as I said, the use of mapping during lockdown in terms of learn anytime, learn anywhere. But just to qualify that, the LALA map came from an idea about Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck said the most important thing about education is learn anytime, learn anywhere. And so we took that idea about learn anytime and learn anywhere and created a LALA map. And the parents then began to think about, well, actually, there's a lot of learning that goes on outside of the classroom. And so it's about making sure that people actually value that contribution that both parents and children are making to their own learning journey. And so we prioritise that across every day. We talk about LALA maps and they complete them as part of their profiling on a weekly basis. So those are some of the kind of inclusive pedagogies that we've developed in terms of the stuck strategies, the LALA mapping, and also the decision-making frameworks as well that go along with trying to make sure that children have opportunities to reflect and lead in a life that they value. So I think that's pretty much the presentation as it stands. Thanks.
We did ask for some questions in advance and you very kindly sent us some in. I don't think we have a lot of time for very many questions, and unfortunately they came back to us anonymously, so I have no idea who asked this question, but I thought this was a pretty good one to ask. So, Nikki, do you think there is a way to reconcile a short-term focus on attainment data with the longer-term goal of encouraging learner autonomy, independence and developing skills?
Yes. I think every teacher, every head teacher has that tension about attainment, and that comes from the understanding that focus is on attainment, and trying to balance that idea about well-being and learner agency and all the different things I've been talking about today is a real tension. It is. But what I would say in answer to that question is I would be focused on progression, your ability to develop a progression narrative for every single child. And so you can do that at a macro level where you look at the cold and hot tasking approach, which I described earlier. You can also look at it at a kind of micro level as well, where you're actually digging really deep in terms of those wee incremental bits of improvement. And one of the ideas that we've got, and it's underway at the moment, is called torch-lit progression, not torch-lit procession, torch-lit progression, which basically means we look at a child in terms of the target and we consider breadth and challenge and application. So from that experience, it would be about, in terms of, are they making progress in terms of breadth? And that's like the range of experiences, like are they applying it outdoors? Is it collaborative? Is it cooperative? Is it active? Or challenge in terms of, is the child able to progress in terms of a wee bit more complexity, a wee bit more independence, a wee bit more in terms of growing confidence? So we look at that in terms of reframing the idea that even looking at stuck strategies, for example, your ability to look at stuck strategies and say, right, well, how do you actually measure progress or improvement in that? And one of the ideas that Frulin had, which we really liked, was he developed a wee scale about competency, which was limited evidence, emerging, developing, and proficient. So you can actually qualify that in terms of, there's limited evidence that child's actually using stuck strategies, or it's emerging, or it's developing. And then you talk to your staff and you develop an understanding of what those different aspects and measures mean for you. So the answer I would say, though, is in terms of attainment, I didn't talk about attainment. For me, I think attainment is really important, but it's also a byproduct of getting learning and well-being absolutely your core drivers, your core business. And then you can focus on progression and say, every single child in my school's got a progression narrative. Every single child. And you can do it at the micro level, you can do it at the macro level, and you can obviously talk about attainment as well. But for me, it's about making sure that the parents understand the progress that your child's making. But most importantly, the child understands what progress they're making. And that comes through reflection. It comes through talking about the cold and hot task approach to the child, profiling, making sense of things, dialogue, agency, all of those different aspects of it. I think it's a more holistic picture than just attainment. And you can balance that by having enough of a compelling compelling narrative and belief about what you're doing. And so learning and well-being is definitely something that would be creating attainment as a byproduct. That would be my answer.
Thank you very much, Nikki. That was an excellent answer. I think we very, very quickly have time for one more question, which I think is a little bit more focused towards me, but I'm actually going to bring you in at the end of it, Nikki, if you don't mind. Yeah. So the question was, will there be a coordinated approach by Education Scotland to building back better? And if so, what are seen as the essential elements? Well, I think we're already have a coordinated approach in Education Scotland to building back better. We did adjust our corporate plan to cope with COVID. But of course, in the context of this webinar, we're really talking about health and wellbeing. And the person who sent in this question have said that, obviously they're from North Ayrshire, they said that we have Nurturing North Ayrshire's recovery that ties together nurture, compassionate, connected classrooms, and our approach to supporting mental health and wellbeing, and that we've also modified our quality improvement processes to capture essential data and practice on the process of recovery and building back. And I think that's just a very, very important points that you're making in exactly the right direction to go. So from the point of view of inclusion, wellbeing, equality, and I know all our staff across all the functions of Education Scotland, they will be putting an emphasis on health and wellbeing. But I want to come back to the professional learning paper right at the beginning, and there was 5 points that really came out loudly from research, from what you were telling us in the system about what was working during COVID. And these were the things that came out. And the first three, mental health and wellbeing, are fundamental to learning. What Nikki was saying there, that wellbeing is learning and learning is wellbeing. You can't have one without the other. Schools are important in meeting children's non-academic needs. We didn't realise that as much as we do now after a year of COVID-19, and that we need to promote wellbeing all of the time, not just when we had a crisis like the pandemic. Some of the ways that we have been in Education Scotland have been moving forward is obviously producing resources or sharing resources across the system about promoting wellbeing, promoting good mental health, and they're out there, but also supporting local authorities and schools, because the practice out there is absolutely fantastic. And so if you're already using nurture within your school, if you're already using compassionate connected classrooms, how can we take that to the next step? How can we support you to maybe embed that more in practice, and maybe use some of the strategies that Nikki was giving us? Also, I think we've got a bit of way to go with this. We now realise that wellbeing support within the family context is absolutely essential. And I think Nikki really beautifully illustrated that and how he's doing it in his school. But I think as a system, we need to get a little bit better at that. And also, the last thing, which I just love the way Nikki brought it in about folding in the edges, we need to become more equitable in our systems about how we identify and support our sort of vulnerable learners and also our vulnerable families as well. And I just love the idea of bringing them into the centre. That was absolutely lovely. So I've talked a little bit around inclusive practice, and that's what we will be focusing on. Are our kids present in school? Are our kids participating in school? Are they supported when they're there or outside of school? And are they achieving? Those are the things that we will really be focusing on and building back better and taking some of that learning. But Nikki, do you have anything more? Because you bring this down to a pedagogical level and right into the classroom and the relationships with kids and how it works. Do you have something more that you would like to add to that?
The only thing from experience I would say is when the slide before that one about the nurturing approaches, and I think it's touched on in the compassionate and connected classroom, is we took an idea of one of the principles, which was transition. And we as a school, in terms of Burnside, decided that we would be the world's best school at transitions. In the morning, at break, after break. And that was where we started to develop the idea about check-ins, how important check-ins are and protecting time for check-ins. We then started to reach out to the parents and start to use board maker symbols about how they could get, like a routine going in terms of brushing your teeth and all that type of thing, and sharing that with parents to support them, and using board maker symbols in the class, so it was something that was between class and the home. We looked at the opportunities that the transition in terms of the toast in the mornings, no bells, we got rid of the bells. We then, I wrote a letter to the parents banning mobile phones, and that was important because we felt that based on our level on learning, that it was really important that parents were connecting with their child after several hours and all being together. And if they were on their mobile phones, what message is that sending their child? So I wrote out a letter banning the mobile phones to all the parents, and no parents came back and says, what are you talking about? They basically went, okay, we're buying into what you're saying, so we understand that that's important. Now, these small gestures of putting your phone in your pocket and being there to greet your child after several hours of being apart sounds tiny, but it's massive. It's massive because you've got all that going on across the whole community. So things like that in terms of transitions, if you take one nurture principle and as a school or as a teacher, you develop that as far as you possibly can and get people to collaborate around it, then you're on the right way. You're on the right path. But yeah, that's definitely something I think that all schools are getting really, really better at, looking at those nurturing principles and looking at ways of organising themselves around those principles, just like I was talking about earlier in the presentation about different principles.
Well, Nikki, that brings us right to the very end and spot on time, 5 o'clock. I don't know how we managed that, but I think we finished on an absolute essential that something that we can all do is we can make ourselves emotionally available to children, whether it's our own children or whether it's the children that we are in school and learning with in school. So all I can do is do a massive thank you to you, Nikki. I think from the postings in the chat, everybody has enjoyed that. After this, please, will you fill in the evaluation form for us? It's posted in the chat. We will also be sending out to you a link to the recording of this webinar and giving you a link to a PDF of the presentation. But thank you for joining us, and we hope you can attend the next webinar in this series. So everybody can go home safely. Thank you very much.